Hey, this is Craig Scott from Fuuz, the CEO and founder, and this is the Manufacturing Matrix podcast. I am joined here today with Ed Sosnowski, one of my team members, cohorts. Ed, new to the show. Why don't you give everybody a little bit of background about yourself?
Sure. Yeah, so I just joined Fuuz a month and a half ago, I think, and the director of operations. A little bit about my background. I spent probably half of my career in industry. So as both a lean practitioner, Six Sigma, black belt, I guess I would say if I identify by any one thing, it's probably that as a lean practitioner at heart, and kind of bring that into everything that I do. But I also did a fair bit of project and program management and a variety of other roles within manufacturing, and then had the opportunity to go into software. One of my buddies, as one of the businesses that I was working in, went bankrupt. He was like, "Hey, I think you'd be a perfect fit here for a ERP company that was focused on manufacturing," and it kind of enticed me to come over to the software side. Obviously, margins in software are pretty good, so I was like, "All right, hey, let's
Is that
give
the
this a
dark
try."
side or the light side? What?
Hard to say.
Yeah.
Hard to say. But I've been there ever since, so I guess maybe it's the light side.
There you go.
So anyway, yeah, I've then had a variety of different roles, from implementation, training, pre-sales, a good majority of my career in pre-sales in software, and I love it. So, Craig, obviously you challenged me to say, "Hey, could you help us out here on the operations side?" And that was really something that got me excited. I love operations. I love process improvement, obviously, and here I am.
Yeah, awesome. Well, thanks, Ed. You and I have known each other for a number of years, quite a few years. I know we've always tried to get something going together. One of the things that I really like, and one of the reasons why I wanted to bring you onto the team, was because you are a manufacturing guy at heart, right? Like most of us are at Fuuz. We're a very different type of software company in that regard. Even our engineers come from industry. So it was built by manufacturers for manufacturers. I know that's very cliche because a lot of companies say that, but I think we really drink our own Kool-Aid in a lot of ways. So bringing folks like you in who can, take ownership and leadership is very important, because we're going to talk today a little bit about a couple really important topics as it pertains to MES implementation, but also from a manufacturer's standpoint, from a process and procedure perspective, things that are important or critical to their MES project. Mm-hmm. You've been through ERP and other software deployments yourself.
Yeah.
So you've been both on the receiving end and the giving end of these types of scenarios. So for a lot of our customers and potential clients out there, partners that are working with future Fuuz clients, right? Or maybe they're a Fuuz customer going through or thinking about going through their initial deployment. There's a lot of things that need to be considered that oftentimes I think get overlooked.
Yeah.
Especially for us, because I think there has been, maybe the past 10, 20 years, a lot of emphasis on ERP, right? And I think ERP had been sold as sort of the center of your business, right?
Yeah.
And this all-encompassing thing, that the single source of truth. And I think what we're seeing now is more of a shift away from that, where ERP is certainly a tool and it's a part of that, but now everybody is looking for best-in-breed applications, right? Whether it's TMS, MES, WMS.
Yeah.
And how do you bring all these things together? And a lot of our deployments, as you know now, are done in parallel or tandem with an ERP system. And so sometimes the client perceives this project as really an ERP implementation and really doesn't think about what we're doing over here on the side, right? But the reality is it's almost flipped, in my opinion anyways. It's flipped. The ERP is the benefactor of what the MES is doing.
For sure.
Right. So, and we've talked about, a few things before in other podcasts about transactions and events. Right. And I think some of the things that you and I talked about initially when you joined was like the ERP system is focused on transaction, like work orders and sales orders, purchase orders. Right. Those things are opened, they're in process, and they're closed. But there's a lot of events that occur to close a work order. Right. Sometimes hundreds, if not thousands, when you think about it from a manufacturer's perspective.
Yeah.
If you're stamping parts, I know you've got a stamping background, and so do I, right? So, we have to set up the press. We got to load the tool, right? SMED and all these other activities that we're trying to accomplish. I'm sure you're familiar with SMED with your lean background, right? Did anyone ever get to single minute exchange?
Not where I was at.
It's very tough. It's very tough.
The last 10%, right now you're into, extreme amounts of dollars to work out the, most minute level of detail.
The juice may not be worth the squeeze.
Exactly.
But so that's kind of what we're talking about is even when you go through a Kaizen event, right, as a manufacturer, there's a tremendous amount of change, right? And you go through these Kaizen events in a boardroom, right? We've got sticky notes up on the walls. We're putting all these things together. What are the things we're doing that we have to do, that we don't, that are necessary, but we don't want it? Like all these different aspects of this process, right, from a lean standpoint. But that sort of gets tossed out sometimes when we're doing deployments of software, right? We don't think about it in the same terms as we would. And maybe there's some reasons for that. Maybe that's because there is quite a separation between IT and OT, the operations folks. You and I were both in operations. I was never in IT. I love the IT department because they were enablers for us from a technology perspective. But I think that's where things kind of go wrong, right? So what we want to talk today a little bit about some of your experience and what are some pitfalls that manufacturers should think about, not necessarily for SMED. We're not here to talk about that so much, but for system deployment, right? You're getting ready, you're excited. You went through all these software demos. You saw all these flashy OEE dashboards, and this new thing you're putting in is just going to change your world, right? So what are some of the common pitfalls that we've seen already in the past couple of months? We've got a number of go lives happening, right? And we're starting to see where some of these clients are starting to see some of the light, I guess. What are some things that you've identified?
Yeah, there's a couple things that popped in my head as you were saying that. I think first and foremost, like going back to your point about the difference between MES and ERP, and we were talking a little bit about this here recently. I think that you hear this this term digital twin all the time, and most of the time it's just marketing speak. I think, very honestly, like nobody's really gotten there. But if there's any application that's as close to a digital twin, it's MES. And so that brings some complexity, right? It is matching or needs to match exactly what you're doing on the shop floor. And so because of that level of detail and granularity, there needs to be referential integrity into the data. So you have to take a very disciplined approach to the way that you're even just starting feeding data into that system when you're implementing an MES system. So I'm not sure everybody is really quite aware of that, right? Because maybe they're coming from just having an ERP and they've never had an MES. So in that circumstance, I think they have to lean on their implementation partner to really understand, hey, what is this going to take? We're definitely seeing people get tripped up by that they're waiting too long. They don't really understand the level of effort that it's going to take, and that's on us as well to really beat that drum as early as possible and make sure that everybody understands what it takes. So I would say the thing that also kind of complements that would be to get the team, their team, the shop floor team, the shop floor leadership, et cetera, and all of their stakeholders involved as early as possible, so that there isn't like a, these guys are making the decision, the leadership of the organization, but they're waiting a little bit too long, in my opinion, sometimes to get these guys involved. And I mean, again, kind of even making that parallel back to what you said about a Kaizen event, right? I mean, if the way you get buy-in is to involve people, so the earlier you can get those people involved in the process of implementing this new system, the more likely that they're gonna really take to it, right? When they have feedback into how, especially in an application like Fuuz where there is so much configurability, the more that you can get the team involved as early as possible, it makes it easy on them from a change management perspective because they have been involved. But it also makes it easy on us. The earlier that they're involved and we're getting feedback from them on, oh, hey, it needs to, do this or whatever. We're not waiting, until 6 months down the line or whatever for these guys to now start, getting involved because this is the time for them. There is a natural curve there where, yes, up front, a lot of the work is going to be done in the beginning by our team, but if we can get their teams involved earlier, I think it makes it better on everybody, and it's much more likely to be successful.
Yeah, for sure. So I was just thinking as you were talking too that there's a big difference I think we've seen from client to client. We work with a lot of SMBs, of course, right? We also work with a lot of large enterprise, global companies. Huge difference, right? Yeah. You've got a big difference in resources, both resource availability, but also just people on the team with experience for sure deploying systems, right? The big enterprises oftentimes have controls engineers. They have a lot of OT skill sets, MES developers. They're looking for a very specific type of approach to the application versus the SMBs are kind of coming at this. They're new, right? They're just kind of dabbling in it. We're getting away from paper and pencil. And I think sometimes they perceive an MES as sort of just paper on glass. Like we're going paperless. I hear that all the time, right? Oh, we want to be paperless. Well, that's just a side effect, I think, of implementing a good MES solution. That's not really the goal, right? That shouldn't be like the driver behind MES because, as you said, everyone wants the data. This concept of a digital twin, MES will get you there, but you have to define the rules for your manufacturing process ahead of time. And so many times we go into these companies that haven't even established the rules for how they manufacture things. A lot of just tribal knowledge on the floor, right? And we get into this. We were just having this conversation this morning about data, right? Master data. Where does that come from? Who puts it together? Who owns it, right? There's a big difference between what goes in ERP and what goes in MES. Oftentimes it's 100%. Like oil and water.
Yeah.
And so all of these things, I think, tend to become project risks, especially on the SMB side where we can really help them out and we can be consultative when we work with them or they work with one of our partners, right? It's a huge part of what we have to do versus what I've seen happen on the ERP side of deployments is much more, here's the application, let me show you how to use the application. Now you show me that you know how to use the application. See you later. Right? That's right. ERP. When it comes to our stuff with MES and shop floor and IoT and all of this, it doesn't, I don't want to say it doesn't go smooth. It doesn't go like that because there is no, and we'll probably talk later about build versus buy, but there is no way to take a manufacturer through an MES and say, here's how you're going to use the software. We can show you what the reports look like, what the data is going to look like once we've captured it. But as far as how we capture it, where we capture it, who's capturing it, all of these, the five, W's, right? Who, what, where, when, why, and all this stuff is really the core of what the MES is trying to help customers do. So in your opinion, are there things that a manufacturer could do to try to prepare themselves for this journey, right, ahead of time? Is there things that are, big red flags that we've seen in some of these projects where you would say, if I was, company X and I'm thinking about going with an MES system, before I even go into demos, I would be doing X, Y, or Z.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think you're spot on there. If it's just about digitizing the process, that's, maybe not quite the reason to be implementing an MES, right? I think you need to be much more, really think about what type of value that you're driving and why MES. I think, a lot of like traceability, for example, is one that we hear a lot, right? Mm-hmm. Well, we want to have traceability. Well, okay. Well, what does that mean? Like
Can you explain
what
to me?
problem, is happening in your business that requires that? Now, obviously we know the answer to that. A lot of, a good majority of those answers, but those are the things I think you have to start with, is really understanding, what issues are you trying to solve, and do you expect that the MES is going to help you with? As I was talking about the digital twin, we're going to mirror the process, but the benefit of the MES above and beyond mirroring the process is really putting controls in place that don't exist today because of that manual process, right? So that's really some of the things that you need to be thinking about is like, where do we come upon issues, and how would controls that the MES could provide us help us essentially error-proof those processes? That's what we're after there, right? We're really after error-proofing and ensuring that we accomplish those big rocks that they're looking to solve, whether that's traceability or maybe driving good quality control, things like that, and so that we can make that a full digital process, all the way through and get all of those results. So, I mean, I guess getting back to your original question, that would be where I would start is what are the goals? What controls are we trying to put in place? Why? And then also, map out your current state. I mean, obviously you're talking to the lean guy, so that's where I always start is like, if you don't already have that would be where I would start is make sure that you have a good process. Because one, it's going to help you engage with any MES provider if you can actually explain to them what you do in a really detailed manner and point out, I mean, where are the areas where there's opportunities for improvement, because again, we don't want to just mirror exactly what you're doing today. If there's an opportunity to drive some improvement, maybe because you're doing what you're doing today because you didn't have the capabilities within the software or lack of software. So then that MES partner can say to you, okay, hey, here's some options that you have to drive the control that you need to solve that particular problem.
Yeah. What I took away was, we should be thinking about what our specific use cases are as a company, right? And you made a good point about traceability. I do a lot of demos, for potential clients, and that'll be one of the first things that comes out as well. We're looking for traceability. So I started asking, explain that to me, right? Like you said, some of these things can become so ambiguous in terms of what the definitions are. So many people even have different definitions of what MES is. Sure. I've been through factories that have sophisticated MES solutions, and you don't see a single screen on the shop floor anywhere, right? It's completely headless. Yeah. I've been in other plants where the operators are so engrossed in having to put data into their terminals that they're not even making parts.
It's not value added.
So, and everything in between. So I think it's really important as a manufacturer that you focus on, what drives your business, what makes you competitive in your space. How do we focus on improving those things? and really defining the use cases. If you come to us and say we're interested in traceability, make sure you can explain and articulate from what perspective, right? Do you care about the raw material? Do you care more about work in process? Like what is it? And who is it going to benefit? And how is it going to benefit? Is it going to benefit the engineering team? Is it going to benefit customer service? How often is this a problem, right? So as you start to unfold all of this, just like you're going through a Kaizen event, right? How often does this occur? Is this something that we should, maybe isn't a priority for us? So I think a lot of those things is what our solution architects try to get to the bottom of,
Right.
with our clients. And, very important to get on site, do a plant tour. We want to be there. We can ask you a ton of questions, but we got to see it. And then to your point, being able to help provide best practices, leading practices, whatever you want to call them. So we've got well-defined use cases, right, for the business. Call it current state process mapping, whatever you want to call it, right? But as detailed as possible. And each use case should be prioritized in terms of its impact to the business.
Yes.
How you're solving it today, how often you have to solve that problem today. And then I think beyond that, to your point of like this whole digital twin concept, data, right? Data. Because I know we'll be talking about it later today, probably tomorrow and the rest of this week too. But, data seems to be a major challenge for a lot of companies to wrap their heads around. It may not exist. It might exist in some form that's not readily available or very useful. Companies start using Excel, right? And Word documents for, when I first started, my job was developing as a manufacturing engineer. I had to write what we call process plans. So every new product launch that we did, I had to dissect that stamping or assembly or whatever it was, and I had to develop all the process plans for every single component, how we were going to manufacture it from head to tail, all in Word. And then a few years later, we got a system, right? And so, the owner of the company was really excited. We got this new software. It's really going to help us. It's going to streamline everything. And all we got to do is take all that data you've put together in these process plans and get it into the system. So I brushed up my resume and I went and looked for another job, honestly, because I did not want to do that.
It's hard work.
Tremendous amount of work.
It is hard work for sure.
Oh,
Yeah, and everybody's got to come in with eyes wide open to
Yeah.
that. And if somebody's signing you up for that, to my earlier point, right? Boy, I better understand what the benefit is on the back end for me.
Yeah.
And that's why change management is so often overlooked in so many software implementations. It doesn't matter. You pick the software.
Yep.
You got to bring that team along with you. They have to understand why it's important. The why for everything is always super important. They need to understand why it's important to the organization, and then why it's important to them. Because in the end, it should ideally, make their lives a lot better. But we say the juice is worth the squeeze how many times a day. But they're gonna have to put in a lot of hard work. To your point, so they really need to understand that why.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad you brought up change management, because I think that's grossly understated and overlooked in probably 9 out of 10 projects that I've personally been involved in. I've done hundreds of ERP implementations over the years. We've done, I don't even know, countless number of Fuuz projects. And that change management piece seems like a couple days prior to launch is when everybody starts to realize that there was zero change management leading up to that point, right? And you can't depend on the software vendor for that. There's culture.
Yes,
there's
absolutely.
Your staff, right? You need executive leadership and sponsorship and a project sponsor and someone to own this project as you move it forward. It's a major transformation of the business. Deploying an MES is more of a transformation than even an ERP deployment. ERP touches dozens of people potentially. Your MES is touching hundreds, if not thousands, of people on the shop floor. Like, how do you educate them? How do you and you said, like, what's the value to me? Well, the end consumer for an MES is typically the guy that's running the machine, who's building the widgets. And the widgets are the most important thing we do as a manufacturer, right? Because it's how we make our money. So how do we support those individuals with the right technology, the right hardware, the right amount of training? I'm sure you've been on a shop floor for a go live. What's the first thing the operators typically tell you when they see that you're from the software company there with this new system they have to try to figure out how to use? I'll see if you get it.
Well, I haven't been trained, probably.
That's the first thing.
Yeah.
That is number one. So we have this pretty fun document that we put together, the LRP, right?
The LRP.
The LRP, launch readiness. Literally in there for our customers' benefit is be prepared to hear this. And there's like quotes.
Yeah.
Because I've heard them so many times over the years, right? So we can do all the conference room training and all of that stuff, and people can sign all these sheets and say they were trained. But when the rubber meets the road and you're out there on the shop floor, that person needs to focus on running that machine, right? And building those widgets and getting them done on time.
Right.
And so we're, the initial impression I get sometimes is that, like, maybe we're taking away from that, right? Like, we're just adding another task.
Right.
To their plate. The MES really should be an extension of what they're doing, rather than like an inhibitor, right? It should be
absolutely
enabling.
Yes.
And sometimes it's not, right? With other systems, I would say ours. I would argue it's always helping, but yeah, I mean, that's something that, as you're thinking about doing a big enterprise deployment like this, to really consider the change management piece. How do you handle change management for such a huge part of the business, from receiving door to shipping door and everything, the whole concrete side?
Yeah, I think I have this conversation. My cousin is actually a change management consultant, so her and I have a lot of conversations about this. And there is this human side that I have heard this in industry. When I was in industry, our leadership would often say this almost like a bad word, the soft side of things. Even when we were doing certain things in lean, they would be considered soft, versus a Kaizen being like this hard, hey, we got 5 days in a room, we come out, at the end of the week, we got some, concrete improvement. But you can't overlook the human side of change, right? I mean, there's so much that goes into that. And to your point, right, these guys, they just want to do their job. They want to make their parts and go home at the end of the day and feel good about themselves that they did that work. And there's obviously, everybody's got all kinds of other things going on in their life, and you have to really understand, how stressful, like you said. Yes, they may have been trained, but the definition of training is it's pretty loosey-goosey. Let's just say that, right? Some people would say, well, I showed it to you for 5 minutes or whatever. That's training, right? I like my sports analogies. Dan Campbell always says time on task. I love that, right? Time on task. So how much time on task have those guys had really getting a chance? Because it's pressure now. Like you said, we go live. Now all of a sudden, I've got to use this thing, right? Or else I can't even produce. I mean, that's the difference, to your point about like difference between ERP and MES. Like, if your MES goes down, it's an execution system. If something is not set up properly there, a process routing or something like that, you have data issues in the beginning. You're going to have to maybe record production manually until you get those situations resolved, and come back around and get labels on product or whatever else, right? So it's daunting. Versus me sitting in a room and maybe watching you do something, versus actually getting time on task, doing that maybe on the shop floor, in the Gemba, at the workplace, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, that's it's important. I mean, and there's so much more to it. I mean, that's why there's my cousin has a job as a change management consultant, is because she, over the course of years implementing software saw how many of them fail and was like, I can really help people manage this. So I think it's important for organizations to really understand that. If they don't understand what that means, go get help.
Yeah.
Ask for somebody to come help you if you don't, and at least maybe give you a perspective or build you a little plan. Maybe you can go execute the plan. They don't have to be with you all the way through or whatever, but at least consider that that's a whole discipline in and of itself.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't feel like you're good at it, go get some help.
It's a full-time job during an enterprise software deployment, that change management piece, right? Yeah. It's not something that you can expect the CFO who might be driving this project to handle, or the IT manager to handle, or even if you have a project manager, right, who's kind of moving tasks and prioritizing things. So it's really, really important, and enabling, from our perspective, I would say enabling those shop floor users with as much access to this new thing as possible, right? If you're going to buy a new piece of equipment, usually send people for training, right? They go to the manufacturer, they spend a week there, they learn everything about that piece of equipment, how to operate it, how to maintain it. You get the service manual, they read it, they become certified, right? And then you get the machine on the shop floor, and then the manufacturer's there showing you how to, again, set it up and maintain it. So, this is something that with software that's operating your business and controlling how you make product and how you're going to get product out the door, that I think sometimes manufacturers don't take it quite as seriously as they should, right? So coming into a project like this, thinking about it, having a well-defined set of expectations, what you expect to get out of the software, that realistic expectations too, I'll add, because sometimes it's not, right? Have someone on the team responsible for managing the project, but also some change management, if you can. Hopefully you can afford to do it.
Yeah.
You're spending a lot of time and money on this project to begin with, and you want it to be successful. So what we're trying to do here today is talk about some of the things that make for a successful project. Data, having the data, having it be clean, having it be accurate. So cleanse that, make sure you have access to it, identifying your current state use cases, prioritize those to the business. We used to, back to the operator piece a little bit, what we used to recommend was setting up like a kiosk in like the lunchroom.
That was
right?
exactly what I was going to say. Yeah.
Right. So we're like on the same wavelength, because, and then we would have supervisors and leadership try to reinforce to people, like, go over and play with it, because it's daunting.
Yeah.
Especially for some of your more skilled or tenured workforce. Mm-hmm. I know my dad struggles with the smartphone, right? So now you're putting this new thing out there that they have to interface with, and sometimes that's kind of scary, to be honest. I've had customers actually bring in community colleges will offer training courses, right? Like how to use a computer, how do you send an email. I still have to send my dad's emails for him, when he needs to do something like that. I'm like, Dad, we don't fax anymore. You know that, right? But so all these different things to consider. I did a deployment once, side story. I did an ERP and MES deployment in a small town in Ohio, and the small town was very small. It was like farming community, but there was one manufacturing plant in the town, which is pretty common, right? Midwest. They had a Walmart in the town. The Walmart took the self-checkout stations, they removed them because no one in the town could figure out how to check out of the store. So they put old-fashioned like registers and hired cashiers again and all of that stuff. I mean, I've been in stores recently around here. I don't see a cashier anywhere.
Yeah.
I wouldn't know what to do. But just to prove that point, that the whole community was so adverse to technology and change, they wouldn't have even been able to get groceries, So the manufacturer that I was working with wanted to go full digital full IoT, tablets everywhere. It was a struggle, but they were able to pull it off because they had someone responsible, to your point, for change management, training the employees, and enabling them. Right.
Yeah.
So I don't know if the Walmart ended up putting those checkouts back in later or not, but
No, that's really funny. I mean, I saw that exact same thing happen by us where they made this big swap from cashiers
yeah,
lanes and then went to 80% self checkout, and you could see the panic like set in, and then all that did was just make those other lines way longer.
right.
Right.
Winding around the
But
store.
it took a little time for people to just get familiar and comfortable with it. And right, they could have handled that way better, right? They could have had people there helping people along. Hey, let me show you how to do this or,
Yeah.
or whatever. So to your point, I love the idea of having like a training center. If you can, dedicate a conference room or something like that, or to your point, the lunchroom, someplace that's already accessible to the team members so that they get a chance to understand this and just make it feel way less daunting when they, when the rubber meets the road and it's time for go live. These folks are feeling really good about themselves and not afraid of it, because it's nothing to be afraid of. Honestly, it's going to be easier than what they're doing today, right?
Yeah.
That you don't have to even pick up the pencil, right? All you might have to do is tap a button on the screen, or maybe you don't even, when we get into sometimes phase 2 or something and we get some machine integration. I think that's one of the other things that was going on in my head earlier when we were talking was, as far as the considerations for the customer, is to sometimes you don't know what you don't know. So, really work with the vendor that you're assessing and talk through, I think, what are the things that are logical to try to tackle as a phase 1 versus a phase 2, and what that even might look like, or what, or lean on their experience and say, hey, what's the typical approach here of what should and should not be taken on in this first portion of our MES implementation. Because I think, and I'm sure you've seen this as a pre-sales guy, people get so excited when they start to see the capabilities of software when they're coming from a manual environment, that all of a sudden they go from, nothing to like, oh man, hey, can I have it do this, this, and this, right? I mean, they go from manual process to, one button and I can go home. And so, we have to kind of sometimes reel them in a little bit to say, okay, hey, that's doable, and that's probably a good goal, but let's kind of crawl, walk, run, fly, whatever the analogy is there. Let's take a measured approach to that and build out a good structured plan to get there in a manageable way.
Yeah. I mean, that's where change management starts, right? You're, defining the plan and, come to the table with what I would consider realistic expectations. What can you realistically expect your business to be able to transform into? It's not going to, a lot of people think it's just overnight. Like you flip a switch
Right.
and, we're going to be collecting all the data from all these sensors and it's going to be automatically, doing all these different things. And the reality is maybe 80%, 90% of your equipment's not even ready for this, right? Like,
Yeah.
this whole transformation thing is way beyond just the software piece of it that we're offering, but you brought up a good point to go back to operators and the training, right? It can be daunting and it can be a little bit intimidating and scary for some. The purpose of the MES, though, really in my mind is because it's supposed to control the manufacturing process. It's supposed to identify the issues with the process. So the more you engage with it, the more, call them mistakes or whatever, but the more mistakes or errors that you do as an end user is better for the business, right? We want to know where things are going awry.
Yeah.
So that we can fix them. That's continual improvement. So if you're so afraid of the technology that you're really not willing to even interface with it, you're not gaining the benefit of the software. So from a training standpoint, put it in the lunchroom, right? Put it in a war room, whatever. Have people come in, let them spend 10 or 15 minutes, let them click on everything.
Yeah.
Let's see what happens, right? I want to see all the red warning boxes come up, and I want to make sure that folks could, understand what the system's trying to tell them, right? There's a lot of smarts built in to these systems, right? I don't want to say AI, but there's a lot of intelligence built into the software based on past experiences. I would have operators who would call me over and go, "Hey, man, I need some help. I can't get a label," right? Whatever. It's kind of the way they would look at the system, like it's my label system. So I'm going to hit this button a bunch of times, right? I'm going to get a bunch of labels. That's just a lack of education, right, from the top down as to what the system's really doing. But anyway, they would call me over and be like, "I can't get my label," and I'd look at the HMI big red thing across the top of the screen that says, you have insufficient raw materials loaded to the job, right? And I would look at him and I'd go, "Did you see that?" And he's like, "Oh, I didn't know what that meant." Prime example.
Great example.
Right? That's what the system is there for, is to help drive and control this process. If the operator didn't know what that meant before the system was there, that's the benefit, right? It's like now it is there, and now it is telling him that, but it all goes back to data. All these things we're talking about are so intertwined. But yeah, I just think that's it's kind of funny when you walk the floors. Also, I think in addition to the system, make sure that people aren't afraid of consequences of using the system either, right? Like from a traceability standpoint, I've had folks be very nervous about having like their badge number or even their name printed on a barcode label, right, as being the operator or the production person. I've seen a lot of folks be really afraid of posting scrap, right, or downtime, because it's bad, right? So I don't want to put something that's bad in the system, but at the end of the day, that's really what we're trying to capture.
Absolutely.
It's not to go against that person or hold anything against them, but it's really to help the business improve and ultimately make their life better. Because we can take that back to engineering, quality. Hey, improve the tool, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, you were in, stamping, right? Assembly, fabrication. Did you guys have, a system like this when you were there?
We were mostly manual, and got to the point we implemented an ERP system that had some of those capabilities, but I would say for the most part that also ended up being kind of a
Fairly manual,
troublesome implementation. So yeah, it was mostly manual. Yeah. Yeah, I guess I was one of the things that, I don't know, just popped in my head was the visibility of leadership. And I don't know, it's not exactly relating to what you were talking about at that moment, but it was just about kind of change management and supporting the shop floor folks. The best places I've ever worked at where they had a continuous improvement kind of mentality. So I think that's where it was coming from, or how I made that strange connection.
I said that word.
Yeah.
So.
Well, right. It was because all those things that you were saying were really were at the root about, like, how do we unearth the data? How do we encourage them to get the information in the system so that we can use that information to get better? So two things. The first one is the best places I've ever worked were where the folks who were not directly involved were highly involved in the rollout of that and the sustainment of that change. So what I mean by that is the leadership of the organization it's not just the manufacturing leadership who owns that change. It's accounting, it's HR, it's safety, it's quality, it's engineering. All of those leaders, if they are a part of this change, if they are seen and out there on the shop floor helping make sure that everybody understands, hey, this is important, here's why, and really, shift to shift too, and that requires a significant effort, but the juice again is worth the squeeze. So, I'm talking first shift, second shift, third shift coverage with leadership across all those different teams, kind of popping in and making sure that everybody really understands that and is feeling comfortable. They can ask those questions. They can get past some of those nerves. Oh, hey, I'm a little concerned about putting downtime data in here or whatever, right? They can understand the why behind that. And we talk about this internally for our own process, developing a project plan. You get the same reservations from our engineers, right? When they're assigned to a task and something doesn't go to plan, right? We want to encourage them to say that we're never using that tool to beat somebody over the head, right? It's not because we want to know that Craig Scott on second shift produced that bad part and now we want to go talk to Craig about why he's doing such a bad job. We just want to know, all of the factors that are in there, what shift, what time, what were the conditions that at that moment, and on, what raw materials, what assembly part was associated with that. That helps us get to the root cause, right?
Yeah.
So that's an important part. I think that is from a change management perspective. If you really want to be successful, the entire organization and especially leadership has to show everybody that, hey, we're willing to show up. We're going to be here around the clock to make sure that this thing is going to be a success, and we're here to answer questions. We're here to get you over some of your fears or whatever else. So I think that's important. The other thing that I was going to say when we were talking about that planning up front and data, getting, understanding the significance of even documenting, what your current state process is. Another piece I think that's important from a data perspective is what is the data that you actually want out of that? So to help us kind of scope this and understand, what success looks like is, what are the things that we're actually, you're envisioning.
Yeah.
And obviously we can help you with that. We understand and have seen this, but I think it's still a really good thing for folks to be thinking about as they're assessing MES. Sit down in a room with all of those same folks that I just talked about, the quality folks and manufacturing and accounting, right?
Yeah.
Everybody, right? And understand what are the things that we would love to have out of this system that makes everybody's job that much better, that gives us the ability to understand our business that much better, right? Yeah. And that is the key to continuous improvement. When you have that at your disposal, now you're powerful. Now you can go prioritize and attack those issues.
Yeah, for sure. Not all manufacturers are the same, right? And so, one of the 4 core capabilities of MES is OEE, downtime tracking, right? But it'd be presumptuous of us to assume that OEE is something that's important to all manufacturers, right? It's important to most, but I would argue that everybody is so different in their business and what drives the business. If I'm a super high margin manufacturer, right, but low volume, what's that gonna tell me? Right. And also like measuring every single piece of equipment and every single asset and not focusing on your bottlenecks. Right. So I've seen it used, I would say, so improperly many times over the years, where we're looking at every single asset. What's its performance? That's great. What is that telling me? Right. And also just the numbers goes back to the data. Everybody strives for, world class, right? Greater than 80% OEE. Sure. I've seen dashboards where like, yeah, we're at 90% OEE. You're not. Your data's wrong, right? There's an issue here. And just kind of working with some of our clients to help educate them, that is a core principle of MES, but it's not the only driver. I've heard a lot of manufacturers that focus on, dollarizing this from a management perspective, I think is much more impactful, right? If you show me what does that mean from a dollars and cents perspective, how is that impacting my margin, my bottom line? What was my standard cost for this product? versus what it actually cost me to make it. You could have the worst OEE in the world, but you could be making incredible margins. It's possible, right? The two aren't necessarily, directly related to each other. So that's one of the things where I think the MES can really help you, like a true MES that doesn't just stop at the core four, but offers the extensibility
Sure.
to be able to look at and collect some other data and from other systems too, because you might want to pull in some information from a quality management system or transportation management, right? We might be doing everything incredibly on the shop floor, getting product done. It's amazing, but we're failing on the back end because we're expediting everything to our customer, right? So it's just how do you bring all of that stuff together as a manufacturer and really understand
Yes.
what your real critical KPIs are, and then as you start to go evaluate software, start asking some of these questions, start probing. Well, have that information available. So ask them to show it to you or explain how their software would be able to address those needs for you, right? Because if you're dumping it to Excel and all these other crazy things that we see manufacturers having to do, and then they got to hire somebody like Ed, right, to work, meaningless hours just compiling data in spreadsheets to, that's what we're trying to avoid.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah, I think the thing that popped in my head there on the OEE front was like, well, was that necessary inventory at that moment, right? Yeah, we can be as efficient as that piece of equipment can be as efficient as possible, but I also want to know inventory levels in between my stations and things like that. If we're doing Kanban or whatever else, like, are we defeating Kanban? Just all of those things. I think I told you that story of like one of my proudest moment as a lean guy was when, we really got a factory up and running on visual signals, and the CEO came down with the VP of operations, and a piece of equipment was running, and their Kanban was full, right?
Yeah.
So they stopped the machine, and the CEO and the VP of operations were like, why aren't we running this process? And we had at that point matured to the level of just really good, flexing resources. Cross training was excellent. We were on our game, and the guys knew it, and they kind of ordered these guys to fire up this process, and these guys pushed back. They're like, hey, this is our process says when that Kanban's full, we stop this process, right?
Yeah.
And that was a pretty proud moment. I mean, they ended up losing that argument because it was the CEO, but we did our job as far as I was concerned, right? I mean, there were other things at play there, but pretty cool moment.
Yeah, it's a good point, because if you're going to go through this trouble of implementing a system, right, and training everyone and all of the change management, and you're going to collect all this amazing data and have all these KPIs, are you really signing up to use that information to the best of your ability to drive the business, or are you just wanting the information for information's sake? Right?
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
So two different philosophies, because I was, my first few jobs too out of college, I was always told, if that press ain't running, we ain't making money, right?
Yep.
That was it. And so you did everything you could to keep that thing running, even if that meant we were building inventory we didn't need, right? And then at the end of the month, the accountant would come to me and go, why do we have all these stockpiles of inventory? It's like you're trying to reconcile all of this. We finally did, and that company mature to the point where we were looking at doing like activity-based costing and things where we could leverage the available capacity of it, just build what we had to build in the moment. We even got away from doing like economic order quantities. We went to just small batch. We got our setups, really down. We got into like, pre-setup and all these different types of things, and really drove efficiencies through the business. And we were able to just, start making money hand over fist, right? Which also enabled our sales team now to go out and sell more.
Sell that capacity.
So if I would have had a manufacturing platform at the time, right? We had to do all this manually back then, but if I would have had it, I think the time to value for us would have been significantly decreased. I think what took us probably years to do manually with spreadsheets and paper and training and supervision, right? We had to add many, many layers of people to make all of this happen. I think we would have probably mitigated some of that. So there's some, the Toyota production method, right? Do everything kind of manually. Oftentimes, they try to avoid technology, but I think there's a value there.
Yeah. I mean, I agree. I mean, that's honestly for me been my career is I have this pull towards I really like implementing technology, but I've also kind of classically been trained from a lean perspective to try to like get that process like ironed out first, and then go put technology on top of that to really supercharge it, if you will.
Well, I know you're messing around with all sorts of AI, fun gadgets and things to help even streamline our own internal processes.
100%.
Right? There's so much that you can leverage technology for to make those improvements. But, again, to our point earlier, like you and I typically will sit down and what's our current state look like? What do we want to achieve? And how are we going to get there? And then start to, make some targets and identify those things.
Right,
so everything has a process to it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so we hit on change management, which I think was important. We hit on some things around how to come into this process. I think just being more intentional about what you're trying to accomplish. That was where I was. That was where I was going.
That's
I think
a good word.
At the end was really being intentional with what you're trying to accomplish and what you want out of that system. And honestly, I mean that takes some work. It's gonna, I think it's worth those sessions though. That's, it's just like a Kaizen event or whatever, right? Is to really just sit down with a team and really say like, all right, let's and that it would be an extension of that like mapping process. Go do your current state. You're going to probably struggle, but you could, I mean, again, if you have a good MES partner, the partner could really help you with the future state because they can tell you what it's capable of.
Right.
I love doing that, really mapping out a future state and showing like, okay, here's what, and that's why I selfishly kind of ask for an organization to get me that current state, because if I understand that current state, now I can say, okay, well, I know what our software is capable of. Here's what your future state could kind of look like. Here's areas where you've got this waste that we can eliminate with some digital process or whatever the case may be, or maybe there's errors that we can reduce because of, again, that digitization process. But as a part of that, right? So you get that. If you have that future state map, you can also then map out as a team like what's important to the business. To your point, every business is different. What do we want to get out of this? And it can extend beyond just the MES as well. So like, what other systems could we maybe pull in a combination of data to really help us get better? Like you said, maybe there's
contextualizing the data that you're collecting in the system is super important. I mean, that's why we built the Fuuz platform the way we did, to be the hub of the manufacturing wheel, right? Because we want to absorb, and create a unified space for all of that data to be analyzed, looked at, contextualized, because it means so much to have it all in one spot.
And I think there's some really exciting stuff, speaking of AI, there where we probably haven't even scratched the surface yet, where folks can, like you said, now that you've got all this good information, what can you do with AI to help, drive some analysis to spot some trends maybe that it would take. That's the problem with all systems, right? Is like it becomes an overload of information that you can get out of there, and it becomes daunting. So that's why I think you do have to be so intentional on like, what do we want out of this? Yeah. How can this system help us make better decisions faster? So that thought process is super important. But and then again, like I said, when we And I'm sure our team will continue to really innovate here and use some of that exciting AI technology to really help with enabling people to make better decisions faster.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, we definitely have some things that we'll be talking about, in future podcasts for sure. So, kind of bringing out some of those exciting things, talking about some of the pitfalls of the technology, misuse, some abuse, but how we can logically apply some of that
Yeah.
to MES data. So, no, that's all great. So, well, let's wrap up our conversation here. I want to just kind of go back over a few points. Ed, it's been awesome having you on the podcast. We've talked about things that a manufacturer can do to prepare themselves for a digital transformation, what we've seen. And we didn't cover every single pitfall, but we covered, I think, the top 3 or 4 typically that, cause a lot of turmoil in projects. We've talked about continuous improvement. I think maybe we didn't articulate, but you're never really done deploying MES. It's a continuously evolving type of thing, right? We did say a lot of things about crawl, walk, run, having a roadmap, phasing deployment, current state versus art of the possible.
Yeah.
So if anybody was listening and kind of reading between the lines, it's really what we're getting at here is that unlike most ERP deployments, right? You implement it and it's kind of done, right? I think this is like it's a living thing that the company needs to take some ownership of.
Sure.
Assign someone within the organization to really own this thing and move it forward because it's your lifeblood as a manufacturer. Right?
Sure.
So it'd be like hiring a great team of engineers and throwing them in a room somewhere and never talking to them again.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and I mean, it's just like it's like in quality, when you're doing, PPAP, APQP, right? There's some things there, documents there that if you only use them because they're required, you go and you fill out those documents only because they're required, rather than to really see them as a living, breathing document that's really helping you avoid risk and drive improvement through your process, and to try to continually, revisit that and come back and say, okay, maybe the technology didn't exist back when we first did this, to really to maybe fully error-proof this, but now, we can come back and do that. I just feel like you're spot on there, and that this is something that you have to kind of, and I think that's why it's important to be, when you're going into this decision to make an MES or to get an MES into your facilities, it's important to have a partner that that you can grow with, right? And I think I've said that with every software I've ever been a part of, is like, really make sure that when you're making that decision, that you're not just making it for today, and 5 or even just 10 years down the line, it's not capable of really growing with you. And I think obviously you've been around software long enough. That's why Fuuz was architected the way it was, right? Was so that we got the platform there that is extensible and is in a is going to put you in a position where we're going to solve your problems for today, but then also really be able to take you to the next level. So, today might just be getting that MES going. It might have a little bit more manual intervention from an operator than you'd like, but to our point of continuous improvement and getting that process really refined and in a really good state of order, process capability, if you will, then come back around and maybe drive some automation to your, so that we can get that data from the machine and whatever, and think about, again, just the granularity of data that you get that's different from when you're doing that manually, right? Uptime, downtime reasons become, super, super granular, right? Now you're talking about micro stops and things like this that can teach you a whole bunch more about your equipment and how you can better maintain it and so on and so forth. So I think that's important for people to understand when they're getting into this is like, who can I grow with? And to your point, if I can get into a platform where all of that data is in one place, boy, that really makes it super valuable from a data perspective.
Yeah.
Again, provided that we're in a position and put ourselves in a position to actually do something with that data. It's not
Right.
just data for the sake of data. It's data very specifically defined for improvement.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. It's good stuff, Ed. We're looking forward to, continuing down this adventure and
Absolutely.
taking, the manufacturing world over with Fuuz, one plant at a time.
Yeah,
So,
Yeah,
it's
I'm
exciting.
super excited. Thanks a lot for having me on.
Yeah,
the
thanks for coming
podcast
on.
today.
Yeah, hopefully anybody that's listening to this podcast learned, something about going off and looking for and not just evaluating software vendors, but also, I think what we were really focused on here was how to prepare yourself
Yeah.
for the journey, right? Regardless of what you pick, whether you want to grow horizontally or vertically, right? If you want a point solution and you're just going to grow horizontally and just do more of the same, just
Right.
more of it, or you want a platform and you want to be able to grow vertically, right? And do not only more of the same, but more of the different new future stuff. So we'll talk about more of that and
Yeah.
some
Exci-
future discussions. I want to
Definitely
have you
excited
back
about
on, once we get a couple of these deployments under our belt with some of this cool stuff that these manufacturers will be using. That's kind of new and game changing. So
Yeah.
it's exciting.
Awesome. Thanks
Cool.
again.
Yeah. Thanks, man.